Yo, cheers! It's KenDeep here, and thanks again for tuning in into another video. This time around I want to talk about something a little bit more semantical. And what I'm going to talk about is actually not one specific term. I'm going to talk about the categorization of archetypes. Now, when we take a first look at a character, usually we try to kind of enforce an idea of an archetype onto that character in order to improve our understanding of that. And in this video, I want to talk about why that can be a good thing, but also what we have to be wary of when we do that. Now, before we start, I actually talked with C4IQ about the term gorilla and anga, and we had an hour talk about how it can be applied and what people understand with it. I will be referring to that video from time to time, so if you're interested in that, I will make the link available a little here in the thumbnail and, you know, all that good stuff. Also down in the description below, so much appreciated. Thanks, C4. And with that being said, let's get to it. Now, when we talk about archetypes, usually what we try to kind of convey is a core idea of a playstyle that is applicable to multiple characters. For example, we have zoner characters who are trying to be a little bit more distant from the opposing character and try to maintain that distance as well. While we have rushdown characters who are a little bit more focused on getting in as quickly as possible and trying to maintain pressure as much as possible. And this can also be applied to several other archetypes that I won't even mention here. It's more about the general idea of what an archetype is, and I think you kind of get what I mean. But you have to keep in mind that an archetype is not a definition for that character. Just because a character is defined as a zoner doesn't mean that that character doesn't have any pressure capabilities. I mean, look at Dalsim. Dalsim is really good at keeping bay of the other character and the other player, but once he's in and he's got you cornered, he can do pretty strong pressure by his own right. So keep that in mind.
From everything we've spoken about, right, when we've spoken about execution, toolkit, the evolution of the character, the mechanics of the game, all of these things, and the level of play dictating if a character would be considered Unga. When it comes down to it, I think the title will always remain from your first experience.
A character can go through multiple archetypes depending on his lifespan, depending on the game's patch philosophy, but also depending on the player level, as that can make a big difference on whether Johnny is more of a slow, neutral-based character in a low level or a very strong pressure character on high level. Now, why do we try to categorize characters? There are actually pretty good reasons to do it. One of the reasons is that we try to be faster and more efficient on understanding how we have to approach a matchup, for example. If we right from the get-go understand that Mena is a zoner character, we also understand that it's easier to fight that matchup if we go in slowly and try to exact pressure as much as possible, since we do have experiences from other zoner characters that can carry over to this specific matchup. If we used to play Ken in Street Fighter in previous iterations, and then we suddenly switch over to Guilty Gear and play Soul, we kind of can carry over that rush-down sentiment of trying to corner the opponent as much as possible and as fast as possible, and then sticking to him as close as possible. But also, unfortunately, and lastly, we categorize characters because it's easy. It's very simple to just call a character a rushdown character without any meaning behind it and still not be wrong. Because it's a little bit ambiguous and it's effortless to just throw out words. And this is actually exactly the reason why I want to make the drawbacks of using categorizations and archetypes a little bit more visible, so you can be a little bit more mindful with the semantics of this terminology. Now, the first of these drawbacks is kind of giving up on the flexibility of understanding playstyles. Just because a character is defined by one playstyle doesn't mean that every player has to abhor to these definitions. And that's actually also the reason why I mentioned that these are not definitions. If you look at Soul and go through all these Japanese players, you can see all these very typical Soul players like Haken or Kusuru and all these others. But then you look at Mochi, who is more known for a more calm playstyle, being a little bit more passive in a way, and you can definitely see that he's not using Soul as you would expect, but he's still being very efficient. Thinking that Soul is solely a rushdown character will make it much more difficult for you to deal with that very unique playstyle and character combination. Now, there are still ways in which we can actually make use of these archetype categorizations. One of the first things that actually helped me a lot was not thinking of archetype characters, but rather imagine of archetype applications. Okay, he's currently trying to rush down instead of he's currently trying to play a rush down character. Having these kind of more situational thoughts and interpretations makes it a lot easier for us to apply these quick categorizations and ideas and apply them to a more situational context instead of a major meta context, so to speak. Even with all these limitations that I mentioned earlier, they're still useful to get a quick glance of what a character tries to do. So if we take a look at some normals and specials, and we can kind of estimate really quickly, okay, these are very typical zoner type moves, then that makes it also a little bit easier for us to kind of get a foundation from which then we can maybe grow out of, or also expand that specific direction. And now when we have that baseline, we can also kind of use that for labbing matchups. So again, for example, if we have Axel, we can say, okay, this character is more of a zoner, so I should try to find solutions that allow me to get in more quickly or that allow me to get in safely. And then from that point on, we can kind of see, okay, I've found this very specific solution, and then maybe see, has the archetype of the opposing player kind of changed? And that way we can be a little bit more flexible and kind of see the dynamic between two characters. So yeah, this is more of a semantic issue. And I wanted to talk about it because I think this semantic issue kind of impacts how we think or how we interpret these categorizations and characters. Now, archetypes can help us not only understand characters, but also to a certain degree ourselves. Because they're such an interpretive and subjective terminology, they can help us understand why we interpret a character as rushdown and what solutions we might have to look for when we call a character gorilla.
It is a lot of aspects, it seems, that determine what a character is interpreted in that game. So there could be an alliteration of Leo with the toolkit in another game where he's not ongoing, he's super honest, like Kai is honest. Kai without Grinder, I think, is quite honest. So yeah, Strife Kai then. He seemed pretty fair.
Now, with that all being said, and to sum it all up, don't really try to stop using categorizations or archetypes, because at the end of the day, they're meant to help us. So do that, use that help in order to understand what you have to improve, and also understand how your thinking or understanding of a character might be off or correct. And with all that being said, thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a good day, and thanks for C4IQ for having me on this podcast. If you want all of his info below, you can find it in the description, and I will also display it here just shortly. And with all that being said, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.